La propera convidada és una dona nascuda a València, investigadora de ICREA, l'Institut Català de Recerca. És una arqueòloga especialitzada en art prehistòric d'Espanya i d'Austràlia. Benvinguda, Inés Domingo.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Patricia and EYECatalunya for inviting me to talk about my research here today. And well, I'm an archaeologist, and some people like to call us like the detectives of the past. And as an archaeologist, I work at the University of Barcelona as a career research professor, and I'm also a member of the Seminari d'Estudis i Recerques Prehistòriques. As an archaeologist, I'm especially interested in prehistory. And I look for clues in the archaeological record to try to find out how people lived in prehistory, how they communicate with each other, how they interact with the landscape, and so forth. And one of the archaeological remains that really caught my attention from the very beginning was rock art. Not just because it's fascinating, not just because it's the beauty of the art, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the polychrome bisons of Altamira. I'm also interested because of all the mysteries hidden inside the panels, and also because it's one of the archaeological remains that's been used by many researchers to define what makes us humans, because it's one archaeological remain that shows our capacity to communicate through images and through symbolism, and also our capacity to have and abstract thinking and symbolic behavior. And last but not least, I'm interested because it's the only images that we have from a past that is completely lost. It's kind of a photo gallery where we can find out information about this past. And apart from the things that we traditionally explore from the archaeological point of view, such as how art changed through time and space and so forth, there are things like hot topics that can also be explored through the analysis of the art, such as, for example, a question that everyone likes to talk about today, which is climatic change. We can explore how the climate changed in the past through exploring the different kind of animals depicted in the panels. We can also explore things like technological change through time, exploring the tools and the material culture depicted in the panels and so forth. Rock art is very interesting because it's a global phenomenon. We have rock art everywhere in the world. And so I had to focus on a specific area to conduct my research, and I decided to focus on the rock art of Mediterranean Spain and one specific rock art tradition called Levantine rock art. Levantine rock art is a tradition that was probably created 7,000 years ago. We have more than 1,000 sites in eastern Spain, from the Pyrenees to Almeria. And in the panels we find amazing scenes with naturalistic humans and animals, sharing scenes reflecting different aspects of the past, such as battles. We have different hunting tactics represented, we have ceremonies, and we have many aspects of the past that are really of interest. So what I do is I try to analyze the panels to get clues about how people were living in the past. I'm also interested in other aspects of the art that I can't study from purely archaeological research, so I also established relationships with colleagues from other disciplines. I work with physicians, physicists to analyze pigments. I work with surveyors to do 3D models of the art, not only for scientific purposes, but also for conservation issues and to share it with the public. I'm interested in the heritage values of the art as well, and so forth. But there's one question that I could never answer from an archaeological point of view, and is the question of meaning. What does the art mean? Can we understand the art of a different culture? And so I realized early on in my career that to answer this question, I had to move to a place where rock art is still part of a living culture. And so I decided to move to Australia and start working with colleagues from Flinders University, Professor Claire Smith, to explore rock art in a living context in Arnhem Land. And there's many things I learned from my experience in Australia, but there's one thing that I think is key in our understanding of past forms of art, and is that through ethnoarchaeology, working with indigenous people, I learned that what is important is not the art. The art is just a tool, it's just a gateway to communicate and to pass on information about culture, traditions, about the creation time, and so forth. So it is also the key to educate young generations about the culture. And it's also a way to mark places that are significant in themselves. So the art is not what is important, but the context where it was produced is important. And this is why the same sites were constantly revisited and repainted to mark the importance of these places. And I think this is one of the key points I learned in Australia, because it made me change my way of thinking about past forms of art. So I'm not just looking at the art anymore, just the depictions, but also the context. And I think that's more or less it. Thank you very much.
Perfect. The timing was right. Perfect. 6 minutes. So tell us, Ines, how was that you started with your interest in archaeology? How was that?
It was a surprise to me, so I could say, no, I used to watch Indiana Jones and I fell in love with it, but that's not the case. In fact, I studied history because I was interested in becoming a journalist, so very different from archaeology. But when I was in my first year, I had the chance to go to an excavation as a volunteer, and that was it. I just fell in love with archaeology, with the idea of finding things that the last people that touched them was living like 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago.
The mystery.
So the mystery and the discovery of...
And where was that?
That was in Valencia. It was an excavation in Caudete de las Fuentes. It was an Iberic site from the Iron Age 700 years ago.
So living in the Iberian Peninsula is also a dream place for an archaeologist, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so, because we have, we're really fortunate, and we have archaeological remains dating back 700,000 years ago up until today, because we have reoccupations of the Iberian Peninsula over and over from different cultures, and it's really a place to study archaeology and to
So you decided, I would like to become an archaeologist, but from the archaeology field that is open to the prehistoric art. How was that shift?
That was also by chance. So I started volunteering in excavations from different periods because I really wanted to learn which period I was interested in. And then I had a topic in rock art by one of my professors, Professor Valentín Villaverde in Valencia. And I really loved it when I was studying rock art. So from that time, that was I think when I was in third year, I started reading more about rock art and volunteering in activities related to rock art recording and so forth. And
what is the thing that really attracts you or makes you love this art, or the thing that connects you with that kind of art?
I think it's some of the things I already mentioned. So it's the beauty and the mystery behind it, but also the fact that it's really, I like communication. As I said, I like to, before I wanted to be a journalist, so I like communication, and I'm really impressed about the way of, the capacity of humans to communicate through art, through images, through symbols, and not just through words.
Also, it says a lot about our evolution and the capacity of the symbolism and symbolized thing.
Yeah, but that's complex, because for a long time people thought that we started from very simple depictions to complex ones, but now there's lots of discussions about that, and it seems that from the very beginning we had really like impressive artwork. So it's not really a simple evolution from simple to complex. But we already started with very complex representations.
That's interesting, because also in art, what is complexity? Because modern art had gone back to the simplicity.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of depending on the fashions in each time. So the idea is to be able to communicate through symbols, but then the way you use the symbols to communicate changes with culture. So it's not only related to time, it's related to culture.
The context, but it is very, very hard to find clues about that if we are talking about thousands of years. So what is the process? What tools or technologies do you use to get to know a little better the context in this?
Yeah, in a context like in Spain, where we don't have contact anymore with the people who produce the art, I think we can't keep trying to identify the meaning, but there's other things that we can identify. We can identify function by exploring the context where the art was discovered. So if the rocker is linked to burials, we know it's related to death. If the rocker is related to areas where there's human activities, like daily activities, it could be more related to education, not necessarily ceremonies. So depending on the context, and the analysis of context will be key in order to try to get information about the potential function of the art.
And what have you learned about the people who painted? Who were them in the community? Do we know something about that?
Well, it's difficult to know about who were the authors in the past, but through ethnoarchaeology, which is what I do in Australia, working with indigenous people, you realize that not everyone paints, so they are trained to paint. They have to paint what the tradition says, that is the correct way of painting, the correct content of the painting. So maybe because I'm from one skin name or one clan, I can depict these images, but if I'm from another one, I can only depict those other ones. So there's a very complex process about who can depict, who can produce paintings, where can they paint. They can paint in Australia, in the places where they come from or their ancestors come from, but not in the lands of another clans. So it's really well regulated who can paint, where they can paint, what they can paint, and so forth. And it probably was the same in the past. So, and it's the same in the present. So if we have a church, no, everyone can go there and paint the church. We'll choose the right person to depict the right images in
So they were important, or people who had this specific training and role in the community, who were the ones who painted.
Yeah.
Who painted the history of their own community.
And also, well, in the communities, it's very clear that the tradition and the knowledge is passed on from generation to generation, and you get the knowledge as you get older, and the elders are the ones who have all the knowledge. They don't live in capitalist societies. So what is important in these indigenous communities is the knowledge. So you have to get the right to know, and you get that as the time passes, and you show interest for knowledge, and then you might get it and become important in the community because you have the knowledge.
And also all the pigments and all that, to learn how to use that. How is that? What pigments that were used?
Well, that's interesting because everyone always asks, were they using blood? And no, we have done analysis, and we've never found blood as part of the pigments. They use all sorts of natural pigments, but especially iron oxides for the reds, black carbon or manganese for the blacks, kaolin for the whites. So it's pigments, minerals, or that they can find in nature, and they mix it with different elements. So in archaeology, it's very rare to find out the organic matter that they use to mix it. But through, for example, ethnoarchaeology in Australia, they used to mix it with the juice of an orchid. So there's different natural materials that they can use to produce these pigments, and that's something that they learn through culture too.
And very complex processes that they have to learn and pass.
Yeah. So the act of painting is not it's not something simple. They first have to go and gather the materials they need to produce the art, as our colleague that was talking before does, trying to get sand and things to produce his art. So that was the same in the past. And then the creation process in itself is something that's prepared and it's very complex.
And how you were mentioning how important has been for you to go to Australia and to see the communities, living communities of indigenous, to see how the context was important. How that experience enriches or connects with what you have been doing in Spain in these very, very old excavations or caves?
Well, I decided to move to Australia apart from because they have rock art, also because the indigenous communities living there were hunter-gatherers, which is the same economic way of life. We think people producing the prehistoric, most of the prehistoric art in Spain were as well, so they were also hunter-gatherers. So I tried to compare societies that have same economic levels. But then through my experience in Australia, I learned things about the importance of the landscape for indigenous people, which was probably the same in the past. We now forget about how important is the landscape to survive, but in fact we completely depend on it. And for indigenous people, for example, there's special connections to specific places in the landscape, and these places are powerful because they are linked to the creation time, and this is why in those places they produce the art. So it reminds us, well, it made me think about the art differently. So I used to focus just on the paintings themselves, on the animals depicted, on the scenes and so forth, and forget about the context. And in fact, I realized through working in Australia that what is important is the landscape, and we need to try to find out the patterns in the landscape where the rock art is located, to try to understand how the art was used. So we might not be able to understand the meaning, but we can get other information about how people used art in the past.
And what is your current project or line of research that you are pursuing right now?
Well, I have two different projects. I have one in Spain to continue understanding the evolution of Levantine rock art in Spain. And then we also were granted a scholarship in Australia to continue studying rock art in a specific area in Arnhem Land. So these are the two projects I have at the moment.
And what are now you're talking about the aesthetic experience that you have had when you see these things. What do you feel when you discover, when you enter into a cave and find this huge or tiny but very old work of art? What do you feel?
I think I could compare that, like I now have little kids, and I'm really impressed about their faces and their feelings when they open a present in Christmas. And I think for us as archaeologists, it's kind of that. So it's kind of discovering something that's been hidden there for ages, and you're the first person to discover that. And the feeling is amazing. And if it's rock art, it's even more impressive. So sometimes when you see a site for the first time, you can even cry. So that's what happened to me in Australia. The first rock art site I visited in Australia made me cry, just because it's so impressive, so beautiful, so colorful, full of power.
So and well preserved probably because of the...
And well preserved because it's a continuous tradition. The last generation painting rock art was just 20, 30 years ago.
Wow.
So it's been a continuing tradition.
Now I would like to go to one of these caves to see this.
I think you should. That's a breathtaking experience.
Thank you very, very much, Ines, for sharing with us your passion for the archaeology and for the art, and that is very connected to what we were talking before. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For inviting me to talk about my research here today. And well, I'm an archaeologist, and some people like to call us like the detectives of the past. And as an archaeologist, I work at the University of Barcelona as a career research professor, and I'm also a member of the Seminari d'Estudis i Recerques Prehistòriques. As an archaeologist, I'm especially interested in prehistory, and I look for clues in the archaeological record to try to find out how people lived in prehistory, how they communicate with each other, how they interact with the landscape, and so forth. And one of the archaeological remains that really caught my attention from the very beginning was rock art, exploring the tools and the material culture depicted in the panels and so forth. Rock art is very interesting because it's a global phenomenon. We have rock art everywhere in the world. And so I had to focus on a specific area to conduct my research, and I decided to focus on the rock art of Mediterranean Spain and one specific rock art tradition called Levantine rock art. Levantine rock art is a tradition that was probably created 7,000 years ago. We have more than 1,000 sites in eastern Spain, from the Pyrenees to Almeria. And in the panels we find amazing scenes with naturalistic humans and animals, sharing scenes reflecting different aspects of the past, such as, but not just because it's fascinating, not just because it's the beauty of the art, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the polychrome bisons of Altamira. I'm also interested because of all the mysteries hidden inside the panels, and also because it's one of the archaeological remains that's been used for by many researchers to define what makes us humans, because it's one archaeological remain that shows our capacity to communicate through images and through symbolism, and also our capacity to have an abstract thinking and symbolic behavior. And last but not least, I'm interested because it's the only images that we have from a past that is completely lost. It's kind of a photo gallery where we can find out information about this past. And apart from the things that we traditionally explore from the archaeological point of view, such as how art changed through time and space and so forth, there are things like hot topics that can also be explored through the analysis of the art, such as, for example, a question that everyone likes to talk about today, which is climatic change. We can explore how the climate changed in the past through exploring the different kind of animals depicted in the panels. We can also explore things like technological change through time.
La propera convidada és una dona nascuda a València, investigadora del CREA, l'Institut Català de Recerca. És una arqueòloga especialitzada en art prehistòric d'Espanya i d'Austràlia. Benvinguda, INES Domingo.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Patricia and EYECatalunya for